So we're here with Bob at the Hands Off Assange rally. You all know Bob Young needs no introduction from me. Bob, how are you today?
Very well, thank you, Ranjit.
Do you mind if I just ask you why you're here and what's going on?
Yeah, so the Assange case is very important. Fundamentally, it's about freedom of speech, censorship of the press, control by government of what the people are allowed to know. And I think given the activity I'm involved in raising people's awareness about stealth privatization, I think there's a lot in common. And I know from my own experience how much censorship there is in the media and how little the public are told about what's happening to the NHS.
Thanks, Bob. So, I mean, the idea is that we live in the world's greatest democracy. This is the mother of parliaments behind me. We are blessed people, and much of the narrative of the wars that we've seen since 1990s and the collapse of the Soviet Union has been we're going to bring democracy and remove tyrants to the world. And where does Julian Assange fit into that narrative, and why do you think the US and Britain are so angry with him?
Well, his main work through WikiLeaks was to expose the war crimes committed by America and the United Kingdom, particularly in Iraq. He's responsible for putting into the public domain so much about the secret workings of governments both in here and America. And what they in fact conducted was an illegal war, a war about controlling assets, a war about controlling oil. And the democracy that the West are trying to sell really is a sham. Because if you look in America, we have two neoliberal parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And over in England, we have a Tory party and a Labour party. There's hardly any difference in their main policy agenda, which is to hand over more and more control to corporations. And Julian Assange was exposing what that agenda was. In fact, to paraphrase what he said about the Afghan war, it was a way of laundering money from the tax base of American citizens through Afghanistan back into the Washington war machine. And I can see a parallel with the NHS, whereby they're using the tax base of the UK citizen to funnel it through the provision of healthcare and siphon off as much as possible into profits and shareholder dividends of largely American companies.
That's basically you preempted my question, which was going to be, what has this got to do with British people and why does it affect their interests? But as you kind of pointed out, we've seen that through the COVID pandemic, we've seen it through the wars, huge amounts of state-owned money passing into private corporations in order to fund these policies, which are very dystopian, don't serve the interests of British people, but do serve the interests of the Wall Street and City elite. Now, you brought us kind of nicely to the NHS. Can I ask your opinion of the fact that the Royal College of Nurses are going to be balloting for industrial action, obviously in the face of the cost of living crisis, which, in our opinion, is essentially a classic crisis of capitalism. The crisis of overproduction is a worldwide global crisis that hit again, not just in 2008, but also in 2020. And the economies are reeling from that, obviously exacerbated by their policy of sanctions on Russia and sanctions war on Russia, which has sent energy prices sky high. So cost of living is going sky high. We knew nurses were, some of them, despite working full-time in a professional capacity in a much valued role, already on the breadline, and some were attending, and going to go to food banks. Liz Truss, our new Prime Minister, has said she wants to make that illegal, not by increasing the pay, but just by stopping them from going to food banks. So in that context, what do you think is the role of the nurses' ballot, and how do you think that's going to turn out?
Well, the nurses, any healthcare worker, doesn't want to go on strike unless absolutely necessary. And the government, in terms of keeping their wages suppressed for over a decade, have led to such a desperate situation within the NHS. We have a massive workforce crisis, and the nurses who are still within the NHS are struggling to provide safe care. And they know if their terms and conditions are kept as bad as they currently are, we can never get on top of that problem. And ultimately, this is about patient safety. So if you do not pay nurses well enough, you do not support a highly qualified and trained workforce, you're going to get very poor outcomes for the patient. And that's the connection that needs to be made. This is not purely about money. This is about having a safe National Health Service. And what the government want to do is to keep the wage bill down to maximise profit for future corporate raiders. That is the battle, and that is what the RCN needs to get across. I'm happy they're balloting for strike action, but let's not forget the RCN actually endorsed the Health and Care Bill 2021, which was the final bit of legislation that locks in American corporate templates and a mechanism for their takeover of the NHS.
Thanks, Bob. So essentially, it's good that they're going to try and protect wages, because without that, there'll be no NHS. But we also have to get much smarter about the policies of our government, the games that they're playing, and the way in which they're privatising and destroying the service. And I think if we fight on that basis, we'll have widespread support and we'll educate the British public, who are all facing this crisis, which is essentially a crisis of capitalism. Bob, thank you so much for speaking to us. Is there any last word that you'd like to say?
No, information is power. Everything we can do to get more people informed, the better. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bob. And I'm going to end just with a little picture of, here we are in Parliament. Protesters are gathering with their hands around Parliament. It's not going to be for a couple of hours, so the crowds are still small. We've got a group of evangelicalists who are filming a video for their mental enslavement over here. And we've got some more knowledgeable protesters over here. And there you are, the mother of all parliaments, mother of injustice, mother of colonialism, mother of empire, and our very own Big Ben. Ding dong.